Well, that was one of the best qualifying sessions I've seen for a long time. There's a lot of talk in Formula One about how we should spruce up the show, we should have sprint races, we should make the cars easier to overtake. We just did qualifying sessions like that. Unbelievably close, amazing pressure, great circuit, very demanding circuit, no room for error at all. And you multiply all that by a range of very soft compound Pirelli tyres, very difficult to get the tyres to operate at their optimum on all three sectors. Impossible indeed. And whether or not anybody out there knew how to do that, I don't know. I think it was just magic, really, when some drivers like Yuki Tsunoda or Pierre Gasly or Nico Hülkenberg, all of whom shone at some point in qualifying, put in a devastatingly quick lap. And it was probably because they just found that compromise between all three sectors. Anyway, put all that together and the result was just an amazing qualifying session. Incredibly small differences between Red Bull, Honda and McLaren-Mercedes. And of course, overnight from Friday, the big question had been whether or not Max and Red Bull could really stage some sort of recovery, because how they looked on Friday was about the most ragged they'd looked all year. They weren't that quick in a straight line, and Max seemed unable to get the tyres to work over the complete Imola lap. The signs out of the box in FP3 were that Red Bull had got it more or less right, whatever they did. I suggested it looked as if they were just running too much of their efficient downforce in the car, putting too much load through the tyres, and they didn't have quite enough top speed yesterday. Certainly they had a bit more top speed today by 2 or 3 kilometres an hour, and certainly it looked as if Max could get much more out of the tyres. So maybe they did, just in their own way, in the floor section of the car, take out some of the downforce, some of the drag, if you like, from that car. All of a sudden, Max had a race car, and he went out on medium tyres right at the start of FP3. Both of them felt the balance was pretty good. And then almost straight away, Max went into a long run, the long run that he didn't do yesterday. I say long run, they put fuel in the car, but it was only a 4 or 5 lap run, so it couldn't really be compared with anything we saw yesterday from, say, Lando Norris. But nonetheless, obviously he was now in the ballpark and he was kind of making up for lost ground from yesterday. Two of the key moments in FP3, it was an eventful FP3, let alone the qualifying session we were going to have in the afternoon, but two of the key moments when Fernando Alonso went off in the Aston Martin. He was on the 7th lap on hard tyres doing a longish run as well. He hadn't looked very good on Friday, didn't look particularly good at this moment either. The tyres were obviously going away, the grip was going away, and coming into the double apex left, the last main corner of the lap before the run down towards the start-finish line, he basically lost the front going in. It was one of those typical Fernando things. You could see the sort of slightly spiky steering that he always does, his trademark steering. And the minute he did this on this occasion, with the grip level as it was and the balance as it was, the car just got away from him and he went off into the barrier on the outside. Quite severe damage to the car. They got it rebuilt for qualifying, but it didn't feel right, and Fernando didn't even make it through into Q2. So that was a disappointment, obviously, for Aston Martin on a circuit where I think most of us would have thought they'd go quite well, particularly given the way Aston have started the year. Lance Stroll, of course, then was left basically as the sole representative. He didn't get into Q3, but he came up, I thought, with a quote of qualifying when he said at one point, "I need an overlay of me over me." Presumably something he's never had before, because I was giving him the Fernando overlay, but there you go. Anyway, the other incident of FP3 was Sergio Perez, who, like Max, had looked a lot better. He looked pretty comfortable in the car. And right at the end of FP3, there was a sort of shootout happy hour, everybody on soft tyres simulating a run into qualifying, everybody waiting till the last 2 or 3 minutes before they went out. And Sergio was on a quick lap, doing his usual thing at the Variante Alta, the top chicane at the top of the hill there. Massive use of curb, part of the entry to that chicane. He'd been doing that all weekend, all 4 wheels off the ground, landing, and he landed skew and just overcorrected and went off into the fence on the right. That's got a lot of damage to the Red Bull as well. And although he got back through from Q1, he didn't make it out of Q2, mainly because the car didn't feel right for him as well. So 2 errors from 2 of the most experienced drivers in Formula One that you wouldn't expect that from, bearing in mind they weren't even under pressure anyway. This is only FP3. And the other key element of FP3 was that, of course, that brought out the red, and by then the only quick, significant driver who had actually got a lap in on the soft tyres, the new set of soft tyres, was Oscar Piastri, who blew everyone's mind by doing a 15.5. And all of a sudden, Oscar was on this crest of a wave going into qualifying, having been quickest in FP3, albeit with nobody else having done a time because of the red flag from Sergio Perez. So then we went into qualifying, and certainly there was no doubt it was going to be really close, partly because of the short lap, partly because of the layout of the circuit, partly because it was very difficult to get the Pirelli tyres to work in a uniform way over all three sectors, and partly because it looks as if McLaren, Red Bull and Ferrari are incredibly evenly matched now, certainly around Imola. So what was going to happen? The first thing was that Ferrari ran medium tyres in Q1 and were very quick on the medium tyre. So that was a good call from their point of view. They were obviously running short as soft tyres, and that left them nicely set up for Q2 and Q3. The next thing was that Mercedes seemed to have lost the aggressive pace they apparently showed on Friday. I say apparently because it looked from the evidence that they had made some progress, but all of a sudden they weren't that quick in a straight line compared with, say, McLaren, compared even with Visa Cash App, Yuki Tsunoda. And also Lewis Hamilton, again, not looking convincing in the car, just scraping through in P15. So Mercedes looking about where they have looked since the start of the year, despite some of the promise that was shown yesterday. Two of the bright spots were Nico Hülkenberg, who was unbelievably good in the Haas Ferrari, right up there in the top of the list when he went out after the first phase and comfortably through into Q2. Very, very good job. And also Pierre Gasly looking great in the Alpine as well. An indication, again, I think, of drivers just suddenly getting all three sectors more or less at their optimum, as distinct from looking for perfection in all three sectors. And Pierre Gasly should be noted wearing a nice rendition of an Ayrton Senna helmet too in the Alpine. Kevin Magnussen didn't make it through in the other Haas, however. He was held up quite badly by Oscar Piastri. And as I speak, both drivers have been summoned by the stewards for an explanation. No decision has been yet. Maybe it'll be out by the time I finish this video, so I'll bring you up to speed on that one. But it looked pretty basic in terms of Oscar Piastri ruining Kevin's lap. And the fact that Nico was so quick will also probably be against Oscar in this occasion, but we'll see what happens. Q2 showed just how close qualifying at Imola was going to be. Max Verstappen was quickest for a while, then Yuki Tsunoda was unbelievably fast, and then Charles Leclerc got through the first phase quickest for Ferrari, now on soft tyres. And so they went out on soft tyres for the second part of Q2, and now the pressure was really mounting. Max Verstappen did a 15-1 on a used set of softs. McLaren also out on used tyres, everybody else on new sets, but these were the three drivers, obviously McLaren, the two McLaren drivers and Max, that felt most confident of getting through. And Max did a 15-1 on that used set of soft tyres. Absolutely superb. 299 through the speed trap, which is basically the quickest top speed we had all day. He did 300 as well, but that trap, of course, at the bottom of the hill before the double apex left where Fernando went off. A little bit of a weird place because they're only in 7th gear there, but nonetheless, that is the trap, and nobody went quicker than Max through that trap today. That just shows how much they did change the setup on the RB20 overnight. So Max did that 15-1, Lando Norris 15-3, Charles Leclerc that 15-3 he'd done already, and then Oscar Piastri the 15-4 he'd done in the first phase. So was it going to be Max back again, business as normal, or would Ferrari suddenly do something in Q3, or would it be maybe Lando or Oscar Piastri that would take the pole? And I thought it was interesting at the end of Q2 when you looked at the sector times to see that it bore out this point that there's no way you can get the Pirellis to be perfect over all three sectors. The first sector belonged to Max Verstappen, the second sector to Charles Leclerc in the Ferrari, and the third almost identical times by the two McLaren drivers. And then if you put those three sector times together, you got a lap of 1:14.866. And bear in mind, Max had now done a 15-1. You thought, wow, is he going to be in the 14s? The track was evolving very quickly as well and picking up grip. So definitely somebody was going to do a high 14 to take the pole. The question was who? It was Max. And if ever you wanted a definition of how good Max Verstappen is, it came in Q3 at Imola. Identical top speeds to the McLaren 297, quickest in sector 1, about the same in sector 2, and not as quick as either Lando or Oscar in sector 3. But he took the pole by 0.074, a tiny margin, but not as small as the margin that split the two McLaren drivers. Oscar Piastri just ahead of Lando Norris by the margin of 0.017. It was superb, and as in Q2, the three fastest sectors were held by three different drivers. On this occasion, not Charles Leclerc nor Carlos Sainz. Neither driver found any more in their Ferrari on those final runs in Q3, probably hurt by lack of top speed. McLaren definitely have the advantage there by 2 or 3 clicks, as do Red Bull obviously. But Max quickest in sector 1, Oscar Piastri quickest in sector 2, and Lando Norris quickest in sector 3. And if you put those three sector times together, you came up with a lap in 1:14.8 14.492. And bearing in mind the optimum lap, putting the three best sectors together at the end of Q2 was a 14.8. You can see that Max alone beat that. He did that 14.7, but he was still, 2.5 tenths away from the perfect lap. And that is all about the Pirelli tyres and this soft range of tyres. You've got to have a compromise somewhere. Max continued to believe in himself, to trust in himself, perhaps as Steve Waugh would have said. Quick through sector one, unbelievably good in terms of his change of direction, having a flat car when he's doing that change of direction and getting the power on absolutely perfectly through sector one. It's a relatively simple sector, but it's a sector where you can lose a lot of time. Fernando Alonso, indeed, just going back to Fernando, when he did get out at the beginning of qualifying Q1, had a moment at that first chicane, just ran wide. And it's not an easy part of the track because they're quite quick change of direction. We're talking 4th, 5th gear on 2 occasions in sector 1. Anyway, Max quickest through there, really good, 23.4 compared with Oscar Piastri 23.6 and Lando 23.6. And in sector 2, which had always been Max's nemesis, he did a 25.9. Oscar Piastri 25.9 purple, so he was just 100th quicker. And also Lando Norris 25.9, so nothing to split them through there. And then in sector 3, Max losing a little bit from the tyres, Oscar losing a little bit from the tyres as well, and Lando coming right on song, having not been quickest in either sectors 1 and 2, 25.1, purple in sector 3. So there you have it. Unbelievable qualifying session for Max Verstappen to take the pole ahead of the 2 McLarens at a time when it looks as if the McLaren had the better car, had the better package on Friday. They had a very good job in terms of the homework they did with the car today. And Red Bull had quite a steep mountain to climb to get to where they were. And having got there, probably got there, Max then had to go out and do that perfect lap, almost perfect lap, given the limitation of the tyres. It was just brilliant to watch. And to me, that was one of the great qualifying sessions that I've seen in recent times. Just superb. So Ferrari were 4th and 5th. They'll be disappointed with that. The fans will be disappointed with that. But I guess they'll be thinking, well, it's race tomorrow and anything can happen, of course. And anything can happen. It's a difficult circuit on which not to make mistakes. And it's a very difficult circuit on which to overtake. But you can get bunches of cars as well. So lots could happen tomorrow. George Russell, P6 in the Mercedes, just behind Carlos Sainz. So in some respects, you could say that's moved Mercedes nearer to Ferrari, but they're still a long way away from McLaren-Mercedes, got to say that. George 15.2, Lando Norris 14.8, so there's still a big gap between the factory Mercedes and the customer team. Yuki Tsunoda splitting the 2 Mercedes as well, hammering home that point. Lewis Hamilton 15.5, Yuki Tsunoda 15.4. So in that context, you've got to say factory Mercedes not as quick as the Visa Cash App Honda Special driven by Yuki Tsunoda. Who would have thought that 3 or 4 years ago? Daniel Ricciardo did a very good job in the other Visa Cash App car, 15.6. Excellent job to be P9. And Nico Hülkenberg really deserved to make the top 10. He did qualify 10th, of course, out of tyres, but a really good job by Nico Hülkenberg. Sergio Perez 11th. Yeah, disappointing. Shouldn't have made that mistake. A driver his experience in FP3, a little bit like Fernando. Esteban Ocon did a good job in the other Alpine, P12. That's again a step in the right direction for that team. Lance Stroll was 13th and Alex Albon 14th in the Williams Mercedes, ahead of Pierre Gasly in the other Alpine Renault. So a qualifying session to remember. I wonder whether it'll be a race to remember tomorrow as well. We've had some good ones at Imola in the past. Let's see what happens. Big thanks to Jetcraft, to Pitbox, to OEM Exclusive, and to you, the viewers. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.